I'm on the Pingree Park Road, and I have a dead body.
They did find a body. What?
The triple murder case that still makes no sense. 3 people. Gone in a single night, no signs of forced entry. No neighbors hearing anything unusual.
Police department! Police department!
Hello? Help!
Yes!
Please!
Just a quiet home, and a scene that didn't make sense. At first, it looked straightforward, until investigators started asking questions.
I've never even seen this dude you guys are calling Scott.
You took Scott up there, didn't you? You and Heather took Scott up there.
Because nothing added up, the timeline didn't fit. The evidence contradicted itself, and the people closest to the victims weren't telling the same story.
Scott, in our minds, was the victim of a random act of crime, which doesn't happen in Greeley.
The only thing that could have kept him from performing with us is if he was deathly ill or if, he wasn't with us anymore.
It should have been solvable. 3 victims means 3 sets of clues, but instead it created more confusion, and the deeper detectives looked, the stranger it became. Even now, years later, this case isn't just unsolved, it's unexplained, because sometimes it's not what you find at a crime scene that haunts you, it's what's missing. At first, investigators approach the scene the way they always do, with structure, control, and the assumption that somewhere inside the evidence, there would be a clear starting point. But this time, there wasn't. The house was quiet, undisturbed in ways that didn't match what had happened inside it. There were no broken windows, no forced doors, no immediate signs of struggle that would suggest panic or resistance. It looked like a place where nothing had gone wrong, until you looked closer. 3 victims, all found within the same space, yet the scene didn't tell a single, consistent story. Instead, it felt fragmented, like pieces from different events forced into one moment. Investigators documented everything carefully, trying to build a timeline from what little they had. Who was last seen? Who entered the house? What happened first? Those are the kinds of questions that usually lead somewhere. But here, every answer seemed to create a contradiction. The estimated time of death didn't align perfectly across all 3 victims. That alone was unusual. In most multiple victim cases, events unfold rapidly, within minutes, not hours. But this suggested something slower, or at least something more complicated than a single burst of violence. Then there was the positioning. Each victim was found in a way that didn't clearly connect to the others. Not staged exactly, but not entirely natural either. It was as if the sequence of events had been interrupted or rearranged in a way that made reconstruction difficult. And perhaps most unsettling of all, there was no clear sign of how the killer had entered or left. That detail alone shifted the entire investigation, because when there's no forced entry, it usually means one of 2 things. Either the victims knew the person, or they never saw the threat coming. Both possibilities were explored immediately. Friends, family members, acquaintances, anyone who had access, anyone who could walk into that house without raising alarm, became part of the investigation. Interviews were conducted. Alibis were checked. Timelines were compared. But something strange began to happen. The accounts didn't line up. Not in a way that clearly pointed to guilt, but in a way that made the situation more confusing. Small inconsistencies, differences in memory, gaps that couldn't be easily explained. Individually, they weren't enough to build a case. But collectively, they created doubt. At the same time, forensic teams continued processing the scene, hoping that physical evidence would provide clarity where statements could not. Fingerprints were collected. Trace evidence was analyzed. Every surface, every object was examined for something, anything, that could point to a suspect. But again, the results were frustrating. There was evidence, but not the kind that told a clean story. Some of it suggested familiarity. Some of it suggested intrusion. And some of it didn't seem to belong at all. It was as if multiple narratives were overlapping, each one incomplete. As days turned into weeks, the pressure grew. A triple homicide demands answers, not just for investigators, but for the public. People wanted to know how something like this could happen without explanation. And more importantly, whether it could happen again. But despite the urgency, the case didn't move forward the way it should have. There was no clear suspect to focus on, no definitive sequence of events to present, just a collection of clues that refused to align. Investigators revisited the timeline again and again, trying to force a pattern to emerge. They reconstructed movements, tested theories, questioned assumptions, but every version of events seemed to break at some point. Something didn't fit, and that's when the realization started to set in. This wasn't just a difficult case, it was a confusing one, because the deeper they looked, the less sense it made, and the more they tried to simplify it, the more complicated it became. As the investigation pushed forward, the focus shifted from what happened to something even more difficult. What didn't happen, because in most cases like this, you expect escalation, noise, movement, a sequence that builds from tension to violence. But here, that progression was missing. It was as if whatever occurred inside that house unfolded in fragments, disconnected, out of order, almost controlled. Investigators began reworking the timeline again, this time with a different assumption. What if this wasn't a single event? What if it didn't happen all at once? That theory changed everything. If the deaths occurred at slightly different times, it suggested pauses, moments in between where the perpetrator stayed, moved, or even interacted with the environment without urgency. That's not typical behavior. It points to either extreme confidence or something far more deliberate. And that's where the case took another turn. Because when forensic evidence was re-evaluated under that lens, certain details stood out more clearly. The lack of forced entry no longer just suggested familiarity, it suggested comfort. The kind of comfort that allows someone to remain in a space longer than they should. But then came the contradiction. If the victims knew the person, why wasn't there clearer evidence of interaction? No defensive wounds that told a consistent story. No unified pattern of struggle. It was as if each victim experienced something different. 3 people, 1 location, but not one shared sequence. That detail alone made reconstruction nearly impossible. And then there were the statements. Over time, as investigators revisited witnesses and those close to the victims, the inconsistencies didn't disappear. Deepened, not dramatically, not in a way that screamed guilt, but just enough to prevent certainty. Memories shifted, timelines blurred. Details were added or quietly left out, and without a clear physical narrative, those statements carried more weight than they should have, which made every small contradiction feel larger than it was. At one point, multiple theories were running side by side. A known individual entering the home without resistance, an outsider somehow gaining access without leaving a trace, or something even more complex, an interaction that began normally and turned into something else entirely. Each theory explained part of the case, but none explained all of it, and that's what kept the case from moving forward. Because in order to solve something like this, everything has to align. The evidence, the timeline, the behavior, the motive. Here, nothing aligned completely. It was like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces technically fit, but the picture still doesn't make sense. Years passed. The case was revisited more than once. New techniques were applied. Fresh perspectives were brought in. Investigators hoped that time, combined with better tools, would reveal something that had been missed. But the core problem remained. There was no single version of events that could be proven without contradiction. And that's why, even today, the case continues to stand in a category of its own, not just unsolved, but unexplained, because most mysteries leave behind questions. This one left behind confusion, 3 lives lost, and a story that refuses to come together. And maybe that's what makes it so unsettling, not just that it happened, but that even now, with everything we know, it still doesn't make sense. If this case left you with more questions than answers, that's because some stories don't end the way we expect. They don't resolve. They don't close. They stay with you. So if you want more cases like this, real stories, deeper breakdowns, and mysteries that challenge everything you think you understand, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who loves unsolved cases, and subscribe to the channel, because the next story might be even harder to explain.